Okay, well, so it may help if you do have it closer as far as the microphone. We'll go ahead and open the public comment, and I think, Ken, you are going to make some introductory comments.
Sure. Good morning, Chair Medvegi, councilors. We are here today to have a work session in which we'll continue our discussion for the stormwater rate study, its results, and our recommendations. I did want to take a moment to thank the dozens of county employees and our community members, our external partners and stakeholders, the Clean Water Commission and Council for the vital input that they've given into this effort. And by the way, if I didn't mention, I'm Ken Lader, the Public Works Director, so sorry, jumped ahead there. You know, I had started to list out the individual groups and personal acknowledgements, but it would simply add too much time to our process today to do that. I call attention to this because clean water not only affects the lives of our constituents, but it also requires support and effort by many, many areas within the county and with our external partnerships and stakeholders. I do want to thank Devin and her team directly. They've worked tirelessly to support this effort while continuing their regular day-to-day responsibilities. They've stretched themselves beyond any expectation that I could have had. And I want to acknowledge them and thank them for their strength and their integrity in the process. I've said this before, clean water is integral to our Clark County identity. We associate clean rivers and lakes with Clark County. They are an expectation. The Clean Water Program is vital to ensuring that we can mitigate for the effects of needed development in our county. My personal request to you, councilors, is that next week during our public hearing, you will support our recommendation to adjust the clean water rate and continue to help us maintain this vital resource. And with that, I'll hand it off to Devin and her team.
What a speech.
That's
Thank
great.
you, Director Lader. Good morning, Council. It's great to be around this table with you all. For the record, my name is Devin Rochford. I'm the Clean Water Division Manager in Public Works. Joined here today by two of my closest colleagues. I will let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. Good morning, Council. Jeff Schnabel, Stormwater Infrastructure Manager with the Clean Water Division.
And Andrea Logue, Senior Management Analyst, working for the Clean Water Division.
Thank you, Jeff and Andrea. And these two are a big reason why we are here today. Just to reiterate what Ken said, this has been quite the project we've been working on since January, and what we've learned and achieved we're very proud of. And I just want to also acknowledge Mark for being here and the other county departments for their support. For our presentation today, next slide, please. We will quickly run through where we've been since January, what we've learned and achieved, and give you an overview of how we engage the community, particularly focusing on the recent push through community listening sessions. And then we will talk about the final policy decision that we'll be bringing to you next week for consideration. And really, if we have one objective or desired outcome for today's work session, it's to leave here with a clear understanding of which final rate package we should be bringing forward in ordinance, and whether or not there's support for that. Because you know there are still some options and decisions to be made around what services we provide, what assumptions we're making, that we are looking for your direction on. So I think with that, I will hand it off to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Devin. So I'm going to just quickly go back through in a very high-level overview, just some of the services that Clean Water provides to kind of refresh our memories about the work that we do. Next, please. So capital planning and project implementation, that is primarily delivered through developing and implementing our 6-year stormwater capital plan. Next, please. Maintenance and operations, so as you know, we're responsible for maintaining and operating all of the public stormwater infrastructure in unincorporated Clark County. Next, please. Stormwater planning, partnerships, and coordination. We complete stormwater management planning for specific areas of the county, and we coordinate work with a number of, with multiple local and regional organizations and agencies. Next, please. Monitoring and assessment, we provide monitoring for permit compliance, for contracted services with other agencies, and also for local initiatives. Next, please. Inspections. As you know, we also annually inspect all of the public and private stormwater infrastructure assets within the county. Next, please. Pollution prevention and source control. We provide technical assistance and inspections for pollution-generating businesses. Next, please. Mapping and inventory. We inventory the storm system in our GIS database to form the backbone of all of the inspection, maintenance, and planning work that gets done. And next, education and outreach. We develop and implement education outreach programs for multiple audiences throughout the county and with multiple partners. So I'll go next on into some challenges that we face. So although we have a great team, as you know, we have a lot of internal and external partners and service providers that help us with this work. We think we accomplish a lot with a very high level of efficiency, as much as we can, but there are still some challenges we face going forward, and I'll just very quickly again go through a few of those things that we're thinking about. So obviously we're all aware that the compliance remains paramount, so our primary driver is always to be achieving compliance with our Phase 1 municipal stormwater permit. Next, please. And that means complying with new regulatory requirements. So our permit is reissued every 5 years. Most recently, our newest permit came into place in August 1st of 2024. That will control much of what we do for the next 5 years. And each cycle, as we get those new permits, increases our requirements, adds new or expanded projects and ongoing responsibilities for the county. Next, please. Our infrastructure is aging. Many of our important stormwater assets have reached 30 years of age or older, so we're seeing that larger repairs are becoming more and more common as we see that aging infrastructure. Next, please. And as we've talked about, one of our priorities, of course, going forward is underground pipes. These are, of course, out of sight, but very, very important and very critical to the functioning of our system, and we do not currently have a routine inspection and maintenance program to deal with those assets. Next, please. Managing for planning and growth. So population is continuing to grow rapidly in the county. We have more and more infrastructure coming on board every year that we are responsible for managing in the stormwater world. And then in addition, we're responsible for updating the Clark County Stormwater Manual on a periodic basis. So we're just beginning one of those updates right now, and it'll take place over the next couple of years, which regulates how stormwater assets are constructed. Next. Salmon recovery needs continue to increase. Some of that drives some of the increasing regulations that we see, and also brings up a need for us to prioritize a lot of our actions so that we can do the most good where it's needed. Next, please. Climate issues, also an issue. More intense rainfall events are posing challenges for our infrastructure. How do we prioritize efforts to make sure that our systems are resilient and we can make them less prone to flooding as we see those stronger events? And then also lake management. So there's been a renewed community interest over the last couple of years in lake management activities and work, and Clean Water has been asked to help support these efforts as we go forward. So with that, I will hand it off to Andrea.
Thank you. Good morning. So the 2025 to 2029 stormwater rate study. Next, please. So where have we been for this study? We kicked it off in January of this year, even with a work session with council. And in February, we worked with, we started our core team meetings and we conducted departmental interviews. In March, we identified service gaps and estimated funding needs, and we also conducted a public survey. In May, we came back to council and we asked you, what are the clean water services that are important to council? In July, we also came back with a work session to council to talk about funding needs, revenue assumptions, and some draft rates at that time. Next slide. So what have we learned? Next slide, please. So the cost for clean water services have gone up. Stormwater rates have stayed the same and were last increased in 2015. The fund balance is diminishing because we have now slid over this tipping point where the cost to provide these services are more than the revenues that we receive with the 2015 rates, and service delivery just continues increasing in cost. Next, please. So inspections, operations, and maintenance, just some quick details. So we have $321 million worth of infrastructure, more than 2,000 public facilities, more than 50,000 individual assets in our portfolio of stormwater infrastructure. 95% of those need to be inspected annually, and there is a required time frame for repairs. Also, 8%, there's been an 8% increase annually of stormwater infrastructure, which has basically doubled the amount since our last rate adjustment in 2015. Next slide, please. So again, some more just quick stat, 600 bioretention facilities that need to be maintained and repaired, 500 stormwater ponds that need survey and maintenance, 500 miles of pipe that needs to be inspected, maintained, and repaired, approximately 100 properties that need mowing, 1,600 dry wells that need inspection and maintenance, more than 1,800 private facilities to inspect annually, and approximately 200 facilities that are over 30 years in age. Next slide, please. So, simultaneous to this rate study process, Clean Water also finalized a fund balance policy, so thank you, Council, for approving this essential policy. Next slide, please. Other revenue, we also during this process have been able to figure out other revenue that we can be utilizing to buy down our rates. One of those is the ability for Clean Water capital projects to be able to receive real estate excise tax 2 or REIT 2, where also we have some fund balance that does need to be spent down, and so that is being added into our rate modeling. We also have a certain amount of revenue for grants and loans and reimbursable contracts and interest. Next slide, please. So we have defined different levels of service. We have mandated services, which are, we consider the base level of service for compliance with our permit, compliance with the Clean Water Act. And then we have recommended services. These are our proactive level of services to prevent infrastructure failure, to extend the life of our infrastructure, to improve infrastructure function, to mitigate public safety risks, and to help save money over time. And then we have the highest level of service, our additional services. And these include reforestation, salmon recovery, watershed health, and more stormwater retrofits. Next slide, please. And so within each of these service levels, we have, we've identified 30 services in the mandated services category, another 22 services in recommended, and then another 10 services would be in the additional services category. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to Devin.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Jen. I just wanted to quickly go over some of the public outreach and engagement that we have been implementing throughout this rate study process. So first slide, Andrea mentioned that we sent out a survey earlier this year to ask the public what clean water services matter most to them. It was a self-select survey. We had 600 respondents. The survey was translated into Vietnamese, Russian, Ukrainian, and Spanish, enabling us to target additional community members throughout the county. And from that survey, we had a question incorporated, next slide please, that asked the public what their opinion was on our ability to protect clean water I know we've showed this a couple of times, but 84% of survey respondents suggested that Clean Water's ability to protect clean water needs improvement. I also want to thank, again, Councilor Young and Councilor Belcott for coming on the bus tour. I think Jordan circulated the video, or I may have, that CBTV made highlighting the Clean Water program. We're really excited about this video and being able to show not only our program in a positive light, but also other public works department. Much of what you saw was our roads and operations department out at 78th Street. And we feel that it really does a good job at showcasing the county in a positive way. So if you have not seen it, we'll make sure you get a link. We also heard at our last work session a recommendation from council and also from Kathleen to consider doing some community listening sessions. So you are aware that we were initially planning to request a rate adoption earlier at the end of August. We decided to bump it out so that we had time to engage the public and hear more from the public, whether or not they're in support of the rate, what services are important to them, or any concerns they had. So we held 3 listening sessions. One was at the Grange out in Orchard. That was a new venue for us, a new community representing a more rural landowners on the urban fringe. We also had a virtual meeting only, and then our last listening session was at Salmon Creek Elementary School, which is where a lot of our capital and stormwater work is focused. And I just wanted to also say that we did provide outreach in Spanish for the community listening sessions on the next slide. And to be more inclusive, we have a new permit requirement to reach over disproportionately impacted, marginalized communities. So we actually hired for the first time a Spanish translator to be present as well. We're really proud of that positive change and providing that option to the community. Next slide, please. I do want to say that throughout this, we've also been updating our website, and everything's been on YouTube, as well as using Facebook to give updates. And on the next slide, I wanted to highlight that our social media engagement numbers, the posts that we've put out about the community listening sessions had 20,000 unique interactions. So we're really proud of the reach, and hopefully it's generated some public awareness. And at the community listening sessions, we didn't get any organized groups showing up vocally opposed. We were a little concerned. We didn't know what we were going to get. And fortunately, most of the attendees of our community listening sessions were there asking great questions and curious and supportive and understanding of why we're requesting this. Also, you may have saw that there was a recent article in the Columbia, and they did a great job at summarizing what we're recommending for the rate study, so I just wanted to highlight that as well. So what does that mean? We're at the end. Whew, it's been a journey. So next steps, we have a scheduled public hearing for Tuesday at 10 a.m. At this public hearing, we'll be requesting council to consider the 2025 to 2029 stormwater rate study and the fixing of stormwater rates and charges. We're asking council to select a final rate based on what clean water services you'd like us to provide, whether or not you just want us to focus on what's mandated and required in compliance, if there's some proactive infrastructure services you'd like us to focus on in the recommended category, or if you're interested in supporting activities in the additional category that move us more towards nature-based solutions and focusing on salmon recovery and watershed health. We are recommending a flat rate, which will help ensure that we're able to guarantee cost recovery over the next 5 years, our permit cycle. And we are also recommending that we revisit the stormwater rate at a frequency of no less than every 5 years with our new permit reissuance. However, we would say that if anything changes from a policy perspective, we've discussed in the past that we could change the rate next year if we needed to. For example, if our grant revenue or anything changes. So that brings us to the results. and I want to go over what we are proposing. So currently, just a reminder, our existing stormwater rate from 2015 to 2024 is approximately $47 per year per stormwater unit. And a stormwater unit is a residential dwelling, or for our non-residential properties, it's equivalent to 3,500 square feet of impervious surfaces. So that for each unit, whether it's the dwelling unit or impervious square footage, the cost is $47 per unit. What we are proposing for 2025 to 2029 is a rate somewhere between, and this is up to, $64.86 to $86.48. And I'll get more granular on what the options are. But this really depends on council's direction on the final level of service you want us to provide, as well as our assumptions around grants and other revenue. And I do, while we charge this annually, I do want to show a comparison of what this would look like monthly if we charge this in the same way that other utilities send out their rates. So on the next slide, our current existing rate, if we broke it down monthly, is about $3.91 a month that we're charging. And what we would be proposing to you to consider is an adjustment of the rate to approximately $5.41 a month up to $7.21 a month. And just to show a comparison that, and I know these things are luxuries, so not meant to assume that every person can afford a pumpkin spice latte or a colossal burger a month, but the rates that we're proposing are less than the cost of purchasing a latte or purchasing a burger from a local establishment. And so on the final slide, I'm just going to summarize what we're showing. Hopefully this is familiar. We've been sharing mandated versus recommended versus additional. So in the blue on the bottom, we'll start there. In the mandated category, we have 30, how we refer to them as, some of them are new services, some are enhanced or improved services to help scale the services we provide with the quantity of infrastructure. This is our base level of service. We would estimate that council would consider, if this is the package, a rate of up to $64.86. And I share that it's an up to because we have not addressed bringing back in additional loan revenues or grant revenue. And so this is the highest that we would, the rate has the potential to actually be lower depending on other policy decisions. In the mandated and recommended services category, this package includes 52 services. And I have given you handouts that, for our discussion, that have all the services listed, and then you've also received the itemized list with all the associated cost assumptions. This includes all of the mandated services plus the proactive infrastructure investments, and we would request council to consider a rate of up to $80.84 a year. And then finally, to provide everything, 62 services total, what we would categorize as the highest level of service that includes reforestation, watershed health, nature-based solutions, plus the proactive infrastructure investments, plus compliance. The rate that we would ask council to consider is up to $86.40 a year, and that is the ceiling. So to wrap things up, and really we want to hear from you with the goal to get a sense of what services everyone is most interested in. Next slide, please. I know you guys have seen this, and I don't know if this, I know there's mixed feelings about this, and I have a handout I can pass around. Andrea made this graphic just to show you in orange, that is where we currently are compared to our neighbors in Clark County. And I think we're all really proud to have landed in a place that would still keep us, regardless of council's option, or council's final decision to approve or not approve, we would still land at the lowest rate in Clark County compared to other jurisdictions. We weren't sure if we were going to get there, so we're glad that we got there. Next slide, please. So again, our next steps would be the public hearing. I do want to remind you that even though with adopting a rate, any new services, any new staff, those would still need to be authorized through the budget adopt. So nothing's guaranteed, quite frankly. There'll be a second opportunity to look more deeply based on Ken and Kathleen and council's recommendations. And then new clean water fees would not be assessed until February of 2025. So now we get into discussion. So our final questions for you today is, here, maybe we can pass this around. Do we have your support? If yes, and maybe we don't, which we respect all viewpoints, what level of service and rate are you most likely to support? Is it just that mandated rate? Is it mandated and recommended rate? Or is it everything? Or is it something else? Because we had asked if there were different service packages we wanted you to, that folks wanted to take a look at. We want to hear also, like, are there services you want removed? Because we can remove those in our rate, further dropping the rate before Tuesday. And just to get a sense of what remaining questions do you have. So I think we can start by discussing the 3 different rates we've showed to you, but we have also prepared some alternative scenarios based on feedback we've heard from you regarding, we've heard that there's different things that folks are interested in, so we've tried to come up with some packages that for us to discuss and consider today as well, alternative to just these 3. But I think with that, I will pause and would love to hear, once again, thank you. You've been very generous with your time. It's been an awesome project to work on, and we really appreciate your consideration.
So there are a lot of bullets there on final questions, so you're asking a lot of questions. I don't know that we actually need to get into all of those prior to the public hearing, but certainly I want to encourage open discussion and give the guidance that you feel as though you need to bring us into that public hearing. I want to echo Director Lader's comments. So from my personal point of view, I've always been very impressed with how responsive our Clean Water Division has been on all my requests, from watershed issues to lake management issues that I've been pushing on. I just thank you. And this is an enormous effort that you've done here, and I wish you didn't have to do it. I wish every man hour that you had, or woman hour, was spent instead on actually improving our clean water, not on doing this bureaucratic aspect of budgeting and planning in the future. But obviously it's necessary, but I wish you didn't have to donate so much of extra time to that effort. I think what you've been presenting has been very responsive, from our one-on-ones to our earlier sessions to now, and certainly to carry over to our public hearing. You've been very responsive, and it's caused you extra work on trying to focus on how we continue to proceed. You know, Karen Bowerman made some really good points the last time on, well, I want to see what services we're going to do for our dollar. You know, it's kind of like in the context of an earmark. Well, I'm going to support the highest rate if you provide these services. My comments back when about, well, how much do we spend on failed systems every year? You know, because I don't want to dedicate a whole lot of our resources to facilities that on some arbitrary timeline are rebuilt or refurbished because they haven't failed or they haven't diminished in their capacity. I mean, I do want an inspection program that's routine, that will identify, you know what, this is imminent, this is going to fail. Next storm comes through, this is gone. We better get on this ahead of time. Versus, you know, you may recommend to replace a facility, but when it fails, then it becomes kind of mandated that you need to replace it. But an inspection, a routine inspection program is simple, at the simplest terms. You know, hey, it's filled, it's infilled. There's too much silt there. It's just not gonna function, and the next big rainstorm, it's gonna be inundated, it's gonna overflow, or just completely fail or bypass the system entirely. You know, that's the trick, you know. I don't wanna invest an arbitrary amount every year in replacing all of the many millions of dollars and thousands of facilities we have. So I appreciate the great detail that you are giving us as far as options. It's just wonderful. But in your slide, bullet number 3, when it talked about grants, I think it came out during one of our earlier sessions. Oh my God, we lost millions of dollars, and I think it was at Heritage, and it may have been the wetland expansion project. And that's since been ameliorated, also by great work by you guys in getting the state to reconsider how it was characterized, that because of the GMA noncompliance issue, it still was entitled to get this other grant. So great work on that. I think we got several $1 million back on that, what we perceived as a huge loss, a grant opportunity, much to our chagrin and much to our surprise. So thank you for all you're doing and have done. Can you remind me, what was the grant amount that you were able to get the state to reconsider for Heritage?
What's that? $3.5 million.
Thank you for that. Okay, so opening up to questions. Do we have questions online, Glenn or Karen?
I do.
Yeah, it is a very low interest loan that we would still get.
Okay, I mischaracterized it as a grant. Super. Glenn or Karen, do you have questions or comments in light of what they're on? Please, go ahead, Councilor Bowerman.
I also would like to reiterate what the chair just stated about your responsiveness to our prior inquiries, or whether they be in one-on-ones or in public sessions. You've been terrific in that regard. And I know that doesn't come by just, you know, flipping over the page. It comes with lots of hard work. And thank you very much for all of that and more that you have done. My questions this time are really for the benefit of the public. Some jurisdictions pay for clean water, as you have highlighted in your slides. And so would you please tell us who within the county would pay the proposed $65 to $86?
That's a great,
Is that clear
question.
what I'm asking?
Yes, it is. Andrew, do you want to take that one and talk a little bit about who pays the clean water fee?
Oh, yes. So basically it's property owners of property within unincorporated Clark County who pay the clean water fee. And then, so should I go into the details of?
I think it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about residential versus non-residential.
Okay, so for residential property, it is 1 unit per residence. And then for commercial property, then we have to take the total impervious square footage on the property, and then we apply an equivalent to a residential unit that's 3,500 square feet. We divide the total square footage of impervious surface on site to then come up with fee units that then are multiplied by that rate of $64 and $64 or $86, and then that's when, so non-residential property will receive a higher fee. They will be billed a higher fee. And we do have some slides that show some different examples.
That one.
Well, and I wonder if we could go all the way, or yeah, I guess we can do that.
1 to 56. Okay. This is a good example. We had some appendix slides.
Yeah, so on this slide, we're showing that basically if you look at in the middle, there's in the teal boxes, well, I guess I can back up and start at the top in the orange box that the rate structure is, and this is kind of a general overview, that the rate structure answers two questions. Is the property inside or outside of the urban growth area? And then is it residential or non-residential? So then we go down to the blue boxes, and that showing, so we talk about the stormwater rate, and right now we're showing what are the current rates. So the annual stormwater rate is $47 inside the urban growth area, and it is $35 outside of the urban growth area. And so for a residential property, it's a very simple equation, because a residence is going to be one unit, considered one unit. So we multiply that annual rate, let's say it's inside the urban growth area, $47, multiplied by 1, the total fee amount is $47. But when we talk about non-residential property, that's where we get a little bit more complicated formula, but let's again go with inside the urban growth area, $47. Then the non-residential properties total impervious surface, so rooftop, pavement, compacted dirt, that is measured, then divided by 3,500 square feet. That is an equivalent residential unit. And thus, the result of that equation is then multiplied by the rate. So to make it really simple, let's say that on a commercial property or a non-residential property, you have 30,000 square feet of impervious surface. You divide it by 3,500 square feet, you result in 10 units. So then $47 multiplied by 10 units would equate to a fee for that year for that property of $470. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm trying to ask this on behalf of the public that always has the question, how does this apply to me? So let me extend this in one more way. You had a wonderful slide that showed the other jurisdictions and the rates that are paid there. And one of them was, let's say, the city of Vancouver. So given that, let's say that we had this increase that was voted up on favorably for somewhere between 65 and, yes, thank you, between 65 and $86 for the unincorporated part of Clark County. City of Vancouver, where is it shown down there? $168.60. So if this rate were passed, that you are proposing now, well, how would it change for people within the city of Vancouver?
It would not change. So each jurisdiction, they all have their own stormwater permits, and they set their own stormwater rates. Therefore, this rate would only affect people in real property owners in unincorporated Clark County.
Thank you. I think that's really important for people to understand how it does or does not apply to them. So thank you. My second question relates back to something that you showed early on in your slides, and I'm sorry I didn't catch the number of the slide at that point, but it was where you were listing some of the really expanded responsibilities of your department now that are just somewhat overwhelming to many in the scope and depth that are required. And I was interested particularly on the one that is 500 miles of pipe that are needing inspection now. Can you reflect for us a little bit on how much of that do you currently have to do and how do you do it?
I think that's a great question. And Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about requirements and pipes and?
Yeah, I can do that. That is a great question, Counselor. Thank you.
26.
how we're planning the slide there, but essentially, pipe inspection and maintenance is one of those odd pieces that is not overseen or required by our stormwater permit, right? So as far as a permit requirement, it's not in there. And so our approach to pipe infrastructure historically has been entirely based on a complaint-driven or a reactive response to an issue. There's not a proactive element of that where we're routinely inspecting or trying to get ahead of any of those types of, like Chairman Murphy talked about, you know, future issues that may occur. We have to wait right now until they occur and then we deal with them. So does that help?
I think one important thing to point out, and we tried to send this message home early on, is historically and still today, compliance with state and federal requirements has been our mission. The challenge is that there are really critical, important things that are good business practices to help us save money over time that just aren't required. And so those activities like inspecting and maintaining pipes for the first time in Clark County's history, that's in the recommended category. Similarly with dry wells, we have 1,600 dry wells, and those are not required to be inspected or maintained. So again, in the recommended category. Similarly, you know, we do mowing. There isn't really a requirement that says you have to mow quarterly. There's some gray area or interpretation of when we choose to mow. So we have some properties that we own that, quite frankly, the grass is getting tall and we get a lot of complaints. So we would recommend that we invest more money in mowing them because it's good for, it's also good for mitigating any fire risks or any nuisance attraction to those properties. However, not 100% mandatory. So what you're seeing on this screen are things we've learned about ourselves. The things that are required are addressing the 600 bioretention facilities, addressing the 500 stormwater ponds, working on the 1,800 private facilities. But the other things on the slide, like the pipes, the dry wells, some of the mowing, and those are in the recommended category. So that's why we've decided to present 3 different rates, because there are some policy decisions where we were looking for council direction that you want us to implement that service, even though it's not required, because it's a good business practice to prevent infrastructure failure and to prevent any risk to public safety or public health. Because we don't want pipes breaking. I think that's our concern at this time.
Thank you, and that's all from me.
Thank you, Karen. I did want to follow up very quickly with a couple of questions that she just asked. I want to make sure on this comparison of rates that we're talking apples and apples and oranges to oranges. So if, for instance, if we were, and just focusing on residential right now, if we were to go with the highest rate that you're proposing, I heard a distinction between within or without the urban growth boundary. So, for instance, if you're recommending 8648 residential, what is the actual amount increase that our in urban growth boundary resident would pay?
I think that's a really great question. And you said in urban growth boundary. Sorry. That would be the $64.86 for mandated, the $80.84 for mandated and recommended, or the $86.48.
So let me make sure I'm clear though. So are you applying the same business model that Vancouver or Washougal would? So where you know, City of Washougal, you list $211. Would it be $86 versus $211? And I'm seeing positive head nods.
Yeah.
Oh,
When you say business model, I think we want to be specific
as far as applying, you know, I don't want to, you know, I'm going to get to the commercial in a second,
Yeah.
which I think gets more complicated.
Yeah.
so that's what I'm referring to. So is it an apple to apple? Will it be 86 versus 211?
And I think the difference is their permit requirements are a bit different under phase two. So if that's what you're.
I'm just talking about the bill to the taxpayer.
The bill that would be the same, yeah.
Okay, so let me.
Did want to clarify that I made sure in this comparison, in that bar chart, is that, it is single-family residential rates that I am comparing there.
Right. So I just didn't want some different rule to be in place for Vancouver, Washougal, or us. So let me complicate it a little bit more. So commercial, you have a formula for non-permeable surfaces. Is that comparable to these rates we're seeing within the cities? I'm seeing some grimaces here.
Well, I don't know.
So,
So actually, the Department of Ecology paid for a regional rate study comparison that was taken on by the city of Tacoma that evaluated the rates of all, multiple jurisdictions across the state. It also looked at the methodology. And one of the things early on, I was asking these questions, are we using a good methodology? And I questioned it hard, and what I learned is we are using the best practice for methodology. So part of the reason that in order to calculate the impervious surface of every single family residential property, that would take a lot of data and a lot of manpower. So what the best practice is to charge residential properties based on dwelling units versus commercial properties who are more likely, non-residential properties is a better terminology, that are likely to have more impervious surface. They don't have dwellings, so they are charged based on the average amount of imperviousness that a residential property would have to create an equivalent.
okay.
So we're consistently using methodology that's recommended and endorsed by the
So
state.
one step further, and Heritage Farms is a good example of this. You go out there and you see all these examples of permeable surfaces that could be put in place instead of non-permeable. So is there going to be some flexibility? So for instance, a big warehouse comes in, a big parking lot, commercial area. Hey, we're going to go the extra cost and we're going to put in one of these semi-permeable surfaces instead. We're going to use a best practice and go to the extra cost of doing this. Can we get some kind of mitigation or credit for that versus, hey, parking lot's a parking lot, a roof's a roof. It's not permeable. So is there going to be any flexibility in that regard if they use some alternative?
I would say at this time, so this is a bit of a complicated answer. When all developments are constructed, all developments have to manage the stormwater runoff. The site needs to function like a forest, essentially. So by having a large industry come in and put in a permeable parking lot, they're just meeting what they're already required to do. It's technically not above and beyond. I think what you're asking is, would we view that as an impervious surface? And I will say that we do have a process that if somebody wants to appeal or have an adjustment based on the type of if they want to talk, if they want somebody to come out and look and say, this is actually not impervious, we do have a system in place where we can do that, but we are not offering any incentives or mitigation for additional stormwater BMPs beyond what's required at this time. We've heard it loud and clear from Councilor Young as well that there's an interest in exploring those incentive programs. I would say that that would come with a significant administrative and staffing cost as well, but it's not something that's off the table to explore down the road. We're just not recommending it at this time.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, not necessarily from the fee perspective, but when they're doing the development, the incentive to do that permeable surface is that they have more land that they can use that's not taken up by a stormwater pond. So there's a front-end incentive, but I'm not sure how that would apply
Okay,
to the rate.
thank you. That answers it.
And
Karen, yes,
sorry,
please.
if I could just really quickly, I looked up the City of Vancouver's calculation for commercial, and they use a area of 2,500 square feet as their unit for multiplying on commercial lots. So it's smaller than what we have, which would lead to a larger rate, total rate. And then it does look like that's calculated. You know, they have for 2023, $14 a month, basically. That's that multiplier. So.
Okay, super.
I think that's a really good point. So our assumption to use 3,500 square feet, we evaluated, do we want to change that? Because another way to generate revenue is if we would have made that unit smaller. However, we didn't want to have adverse impacts on our business community or target them when we actually generate the majority of our revenue from single-family residential property. So it wouldn't have made sense, but Director Later is correct that multiple municipalities actually use a much smaller unit. So a property that we say we charge 10 units, they may be charging 50.
Okay, super. So you definitely were out ahead of my thought process on that area. Karen, did you have any additional questions as a result of this additional discussion?
You know, I feel like we are really ready to go forward on that public hearing. So
Okay.
I have no questions at this time.
Thank you. How about Glenn? Councilor
Yeah,
Young?
I've got a few, and a couple of them have been answered already just by the other questions, so appreciate that. I still do have concerns with, I think I mentioned this probably every work session. I think there needs to be an incentive for people to make improvements. You know, so we have to figure out a way, even if it's not, you know, if you put a pervious parking lot, even though there's still maybe some more impact to the system, there still needs to be some sort of a benefit that people can get for choosing to make responsible choices like that. So, I mean, however we can do that, you know, I'm still wondering also, I don't think I ever got an answer to this question, was whether there's any way to dispute because I think we're going by GIS, and whether there's a way to dispute that, or if they need to go to the, you know, where somebody would need to go if there's some inaccuracies and maybe they're getting charged more than they should.
That's a great question.
You don't have to answer. Go ahead if you
She
have
wants to answer, but Devin, maybe you should have the microphone closer to you.
Can you hear me, Sam?
Yep.
We do have a dispute tracker process that Andrea manages in partnership with our GIS department, where someone can ask to ground truth or verify the charge on their property. For example, if somebody removes an asphalt driveway, or they say, hey, that barn's not there anymore, or actually I expanded my parking lot, you're undercharging me. There is a way for the public to contact and go through a dispute and appeal process. And I hear what you're saying by incentives. Unfortunately, with this, at this time, we don't have a program in place beyond providing reductions for senior and disabled property owners, which exists currently, that reduction opportunity, but I am interested and committed to exploring what incentive programs are out there in 2025 as a follow-up to this rate study, if that is the direction that council would like us to continue on.
That would be my direction, but I'm only one of 5, of course. So, but I would love to at least hear more about that. And it doesn't have to be baked into this process. We're too far along, obviously, to get into that. But I do think that there should be some process to try to get people to be responsible. I don't think I ever got an answer to this one either, but has there been any determination as to how an ADU would or would not be impacting the amount of money somebody pays?
Great question. We have been exploring that actually on the back end, and as of now, that accessory dwelling unit would be charged as an additional unit. So for a single-family residential property that adds 1 ADU, they would be charged 2 units. If they have 2 ADUs, they would be charged 3 units. So the ADU would be treated in the same way that a single-family residential property is built, just being charged one additional fee unit for an ADU.
Okay, so just on a personal level, I'd be opposed to that. I don't think maybe a half a credit or something like that. Just personally, I think we're trying really hard to make ADUs a component of affordable housing. And ADUs are required to mitigate all of their water on site when they're built. So I think that's a factor to consider. And then I just wanted to say, you know, it's, and I appreciate, you know, the slide with the hamburger and the latte and everything, but I think it's important to be said that the housing crisis situation, people that can't afford their homes, it's a combination of all of the different factors, and there is one final straw that breaks the back, you know, one final thing that makes it to where people just can't afford their home anymore. So I feel like this is a reasonable investment, but I just don't want to ignore the fact that this will be impactful to people. And then I was curious, so we've kind of emailed back and forth a little bit on this, but I'm trying to understand what the impacts of us finding out that we're eligible for that loan, you know, and if it does impact the rate, is that built into what we're seeing today? And then I'm still failing quite to understand how a loan that we have to pay back would be an impact to lower the rate potentially. All
good questions. And so at our last work session, we presented that our estimated additional funding gap due to loan and grant ineligibility was approximately $6.4 million that we would need to come up with another revenue source to cover, whether that be REIT or fund balance or passing that cost on to ratepayers. The $3.5 million loan takes away our need to pass those costs on to ratepayers. I will mention it is a 20-year loan at a 0.4% interest rate that we've been offered. So based on that, that's much lesser than current inflation rates. So what it does is it spaces out the time that we really need to recover that revenue. We will have 20 years to pay back that $3.5 million loan at a very marginal interest rate. So it takes the immediate upfront cost burden on our department and spreads it out over time, which helps reduce the amount of revenue we need now. I do think you asked a really important question. So now I just wanted to be on the record that we said we had a $6.4 million uncertainty. Now that Ecology has reclassified the Heritage Farm project and re-offered us the loan, our remaining gap that exists because of uncertainties around grant revenue is only $2.9 million. So we did model how this affects the rates, and right now by bringing in the loan, we are able to buy down the per unit rate by $2 approximately per unit. So that has not been represented today, which is why we said it's an up to number. So if you, the rates that we presented to you today, if council wants to accept the loan, would be $2 less. If we were grant eligible, we would estimate that the rates you're seeing today would be approximately $4 less. So the impact is approximately $2 to $4 per rate unit.
Okay, great. I appreciate that clarification. One last question and then a final comment on my thoughts on the whole thing. My final question would be is I would personally like to see the funding. All this funding is coming in through one source, but it's got many different purposes per se. A lot of those different purposes can be lumped together. I'm a huge fan of making sure that we start to collect money in advance to repair aging infrastructure that we're going to have to be dealing with soon. But what I really would like to see happen is have that money separate in an individual account so that it doesn't get shifted under any circumstances. If there's another need that comes up, oh, let's just borrow from this fund. I think that would be a cleaner and better accounting practice on that. And then just my comments on this. I mean, I personally, I looked at this and I feel like I'm ready to recommend all of the mandated and the recommended, and maybe some of the additional items. And I don't know where the remainder of the council's at, but I would appreciate if during the public hearing we could have just a really quick rundown of each of those additional items.
And I
so
think
those are,
this might be, sorry,
Go ahead.
my apologies.
Go ahead.
I think this might be a good point to call us attention to slide 50. We've presented 3 rates, but we haven't done the a la carte picking and choosing of services. And one of the things we heard you that you were interested in previously was the advanced mitigation bank and the additional services. And I apologize if that's a misrepresentation. But we did want to look at some in-between rates. So number 1 is the all-inclusive rate. It includes everything. Number 2 is all mandated, all recommended, and that one additional advanced mitigation bank. And you can see on the screen what that corresponding rate would be. And I can just walk down these if it would be helpful in slides 52 and 53, 51 and 52 you have access to.
Could you explain what an advanced mitigation bank is?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe you can take that, Jeff.
Sure, yep. So advanced mitigation is a process where the county can go out and do a enhancement project for habitat value or wetland value within a property, kind of like a mitigation bank, but not to be selling credits like they do on a commercial bank. But it does the same basic thing. You identify a bunch of projects that are going to be coming down the pipe that the county wants to build in the next X number of years. Those could be clean water projects. We've used our current site to support some projects in the TIP as well. But what it does is it allows you to front load the mitigation for a large project, and instead of having to purchase mitigation or provide a separate mitigation process for a project, it's already taken care of up front. And so you kind of pre-invest in that property, and then you just kick off credits, and it ends up being a less expensive alternative than simply doing it piecemeal.
But related to stormwater, you still have that immediate impact on the site.
Well,
Correct.
we sometimes even have to mitigate if we're putting in a stormwater project. They may determine that we need to build wetlands. And so what this investment would be under scenario 2, let's say if council's not ready to support all additional, but you are interested in that mitigation bank, we can restore a larger intact area rather than right now a lot of mitigation is done piecemeal where we have to go buy credits, or we may try to put a little wetland here. We have the ability to construct larger contiguous properties that then we can tap into and use when we're implementing other public projects.
Is that something we'll look at in the future? We're not going to be deciding that right now?
No, that is
part
in
of
the
this?
additional.
It
so
could be
that's
something
in here. That's in the additional in orange. So the handouts you have, dark blue, are all the mandated services. Those are compliance. The green is the infrastructure, and the additional is the nature-based stuff. So it lives in here. And so we heard Councilor Young express an interest in that. So we wanted to make sure you guys had an understanding of, let's say, the policy, you want that one additional item, the corresponding rate. And they change. Like if you go to number 4, the rate that you're seeing on the screen there includes only pipe inspection, pipe repair, phosphorus removal cartridges, lake treatment, and advanced mitigation. So there's some options that we wanted to share with you because we asked for feedback on which services you want to pick and choose, and we've heard a little bit from you about what you like, but we didn't get anything in writing, so we proactively tried to make some packages based on what we've heard from you along the journey.
It's a smorgasbord.
It is.
Yes,
we were talking about it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the one reason I think why a particular item is because I was able to see and learn about it on the tour that we did. And so part of this to me is there may be other items on that additional list that I think add value to the county and are worth the, the tax burden that we're asking, but I don't really know quite enough about them to be able to make that judgment, if that makes sense.
So I don't think it's helpful to go through each and every one, and we're also missing a counselor. And you're also talking on issues of, that's why you're a counselor, not in the executive branch doing the job that Devin and Jeff are doing. So I think if there's something on this list that as a policy direction you really strongly favor, I think that's an issue for discussion at the public hearing. And I want to also add, Glenn, please don't take this the wrong way. And I agree with you to a certain extent on these ADU issues. I would like to parse through that. I don't want to charge a full rate for each ADU as if there was a whole nother house there, because the impacts are different. But I'm going to ask a direct question. Glenn, do you do this as a business? Do you remodel ADUs or build them?
So I do, but I have never built an ADU in unincorporated Clark County. So it does not impact me directly. And, that actually, that brings up actually a good question and comment that I would like to talk about, because we had Councilor Marshall recuse herself from a discussion last week or this week, whenever it was. But, there needs to be a distinction here on when there's conflict of interest, because technically anybody on the council right now that lives in unincorporated Clark County has a vested interest on this entire discussion, because it affects how much tax they will or will not pay on their property. So there are certain times when things will directly impact a counselor, but because it's broad and it's not specifically for one item that counselor benefits from, that's a different story. That does not present conflict of interest. So even if I were to build ADUs in the UGA or the outside area, go ahead.
It is very different, and there's much more direct impact if you do build ADUs that are going to be impacted by this. And you may not have a conflict of interest, but the public should know, because you personally said, I personally don't support this, and it may be an area that you're in business on. So
it might be a worthwhile discussion to have at some point. I haven't had an opportunity to ask my questions.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Okay, good.
Glenn, did you have any further comments or questions?
No, not at this time. I appreciate all the work that you've done. We're near the finish line on it.
Councilor Marshall.
Thank you very much. So just broadly, thank you for all this work. I am aware of your work and that you all have been doing a fabulous job with limited resources for a number of years, and this added on top of that workload has been amazing. I think we have all learned through the process. A concern, I have been concerned about how this is framed overall in looking at what's just mandated with the permit and compliance, and then recommended and additional, because and you mentioned, Devin, that the mission is compliance, and I think it is the mandate that is compliance, but that the mission, I'm not sure what your mission is clean water. The mission is clean water. So all of this is within your mission to look at clean water broadly. So just been a little uncomfortable with how it's been framed going along. And I think it's worth noting that Clark County itself is the only Phase 1 stormwater permittee, and that was based on population, as I understand, and that there's a higher bar for Phase 1. And what we know with the Clean Water Act and these permit cycles, we can anticipate that every cycle there'll be additional requirements, just how it works. So I'd like to better understand some of the things that are in these bans. That's page 44 on the slides. is lake management, would that be in the orange level, the high level of service?
Great question. So we provided the full list of services, the number of FTEs, the years, the values in an email previously, which you can send in the spreadsheet, and they're summarized here. To answer your question directly about lake management, we made the decision internally to put it in the recommended category because we did sign an interlocal agreement with the city of Camas that expressed a county willingness to work with them on lake manament. So.
And by recommended, is that mandated, the mandated and
green, sorry.
Okay, great.
Green, I'll start, we're trying to
color-coded now.
Yeah, so the green, this would be the proactive beyond permit compliance.
Great.
To make investments in infrastructure. And this, we put it in the recommended category because there is that ILA that was passed this year. Great.
Good to understand that. And, I think every time we've gotten together, talked about construction, stormwater, and the need for better. I don't know if there's better integration between the various silos in dealing with that, monitoring and enforcement. Living on the edge where a lot of rapid, large-scale development is occurring. It's having a direct impact on water quality on some of those streams. So it's still very much a high priority, and I'm thinking it's probably in the mandated services, but if it can be augmented or dealt with in a stronger way, I drive by some of these situations. One specific stormwater facility, which is Stillbrook, that I've been hearing about for a number of months, and I believe in your, it's been prioritized for this first year to address the problems there. Is that still the case?
That is correct. So, and Jeff can talk a little bit more. There are a few known facilities that we own that need to be fixed, and they haven't been incorporated into our 6-year capital plan. One of those is Stillbrook. Right.
And have they been initially private and then become public, so we've kind of inherited a difficult situation?
You want to talk about that?
Well, the ones that are specifically called out here, Philbrook Farms, Velvet Acres, are the two. There's actually another one, the Fraser Pond. So there are 3 of those in that mandated category, different situations. 2 of them are situations where the facilities were always intended to be donated to the county. They intended to make them a public facility from the get-go. It's just that they've underperformed significantly from what we had expected to see when they were given to the county. And the third one is an example of one that started out as a private facility, and it was kind of determined over time that it was misallocated that way, and then came to us with some attendant needs. So.
Would it be covered under just the mandate? What color is this?
Those are in the blue.
In the blue.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, those are mandated because we are required to address those.
Good to hear that.
Really briefly, I just want to add that we are looking at that infiltration design criteria for these underperforming facilities. We think that it's an indicator that we don't have it quite right, and there needs to be a change there.
Good.
So we're attaching it from 3 different prongs. This would give us the capacity to do the capital, but we are also looking at design standards. And then I would say another element that is in the recommended category that's related is we've had some questions about our maintenance warranties and our bonds that we put on facilities. They expire, are they valued right? And if something's not working, can we ensure that it's fixed before we inherit it? And unfortunately, at least one of these is a situation where the cost to fix the asset was less than what we could recover through the bond, and there were some concerns about if the issues could have been addressed earlier on in the maintenance process. So in the recommended category on item 4, because taxpayer policy decisions, we have included some funding to do a stormwater maintenance bond study, which would be cross-departmental, working with community development, working with engineering and construction, to solve that systemic issue of making sure we get better outcomes for the infrastructure that's constructed.
Great, great. It's good to be able to adaptively manage as we go forward. Really great work with Heritage Farm and Cougar Creek. I know that's been a project that's kind of been on the books for a long time, so it's great to get that going. And I would just say, you know, every 5 years, we've just seen this with other departments, you know, where there's been a reluctance to increase rates, so, and so it gets delayed for a decade or more. I know we just heard from Public Health. They seem to be doing a good job at coming back to us on a more frequent basis. So I would just encourage to come back more frequently if the need is there, rather than to delay, because it becomes harder, so much harder to take this big bite that it looks like we might be getting ready to do. Yeah, and then just a discussion about the rural versus urban, and because I know the resource land, there's and the rural area, there's a little less of a charge, but I think there may be, in many cases, they're actually performing the service of treating the stormwater before it gets to the stream, so you're welcome.
And that's part of the original, when I know, Rebecca, the rate study table, that gray one, I do think it's important to go back to this, if you don't mind. We've been showing you the top rate for single-family residential properties in the urban growth area for properties that are under a half an acre. So if you're able to find that gray table under how the stormwater fee is calculated, I think it's important that what we've been showing you for simplicity is that top number, but the properties outside, what will actually be put in ordinance is that top rate will be represented in that left or middle column, but the rate for the properties outside of the UGA will be slightly lower. And in the second, under number 2, our rate structure currently for properties that are larger, the rate does decrease. And the thought is that the more property you have, the more you're able to absorb that stormwater runoff. And so when we submit this to you in ordinance, you will actually be seeing a table. And so we're happy to also share with you that there are multiple ratepayers throughout the county who will be paying well less if they have a larger property or they're outside of the UGA.
That's great to acknowledge that. And then just preventative maintenance, I think there's plenty of data that can inform how to get ahead of catastrophic failure. So you're not spending money you don't need to spend, but you're preventing a huge expense if there is a catastrophic failure. So I think that's a component we absolutely need to cover. So that's it.
So I just have a few brief words of direction from me. So one, I don't like the idea of getting, and I'll use some common terminology, getting wrapped around the axle, getting into the weeds on what's mandated, what's recommended, what might be nice. You know, I think that discussion started that, okay, what do we need to do as a starting point? Absolutely. Versus what would we like to do? And some of these issues can change over time if we get provisos from the legislature that kind of directs us, well, you're gonna put another stormwater facility that's leading into, on the Lake River, that's leading into Lake Vancouver. That you know, we may not have even have thought of something like that, but it becomes then mandated. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds, because you guys are the executive, you guys are the experts. I want to personally give you the necessary resources to do our absolute best. And that may change over time, and I have a real hard time differentiating between, well, how dirty do I want my water to be? Or how clean do I want it to be? all of this that you've laid out, to me, is our goal. So I personally support the highest rate. For that reason, I am very proud of the work that you have done on shoestring and that our rates are low. Even if we go with a higher rate, our rates are still going to be much lower than anybody else. You are proving the best practice of governance on how you do the most with the least. So, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on all these that you've offered up, and Michelle's not here to weigh in, but I would agree with Glenn, just from a fairness point of view. I'm not in the trades. I don't build things except around my own property. I have no vested interest in this, but we are trying to encourage more density, not only in the cities, but out in our urban areas. We're trying to amplify the amount of living space we have for our families. We are so far behind on structures, on homes of all manner. I mean, I'd like to see the ADUs treated a little bit more fairly and not treated as a single-family home. I think they should have a less rate. And so I don't know where that lands, but I'd certainly like to see that discussion at the public hearing as we move forward. Because we make broad policy decisions, broad policy guidance besides passing budgets. But as far as the detail on how this should be implemented, that's your job. And I'd like to leave it your job and trying to figure out, well, which of these services do I want to add at what cost? I think that's just too much into the weeds for a policy guy to get into. So anyway, thanks again for everything you've done. This is an enormous amount of work. I hope we get it right. I hope councilors will approve this. I hope they'll approve it at the highest level and not hamstring you down the road. And obviously these, as Councilor Marshall said, keep coming back. I'll be gone, but she'll be here, Glenn will be here, Michelle will be here. You'll have some new councilors here. They'll want to hear if we need adjustments. And hopefully I want to set the example for the rest of the state and keep the legislature interested in investing in our capital projects, including lake management. So any last comments by any other counselor before we call it a morning? We will be back in this room at 1 for council time. Again, I understand they're still under construction in the other room. Any last comments? Okay, thanks again. We stand adjourned. Look forward to your public hearing.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You'll still be in Clark County, right? You don't have to say. Are you going to the Bahamas?
No, I'm not